Good afternoon on today's Angry Bulletin.
4, 3, 2, 1.
According to a highly respected spaceflight journalist, you are looking at the most revolutionary rocket ever constructed, given its current accomplishments, not its potential accomplishments. In other words, given the fact that Starship has already made it to space, given the fact that it at least attempted a re-entry, and given the fact that it, at least in theory, could deploy payloads to low Earth orbit, it has already earned the crown of being the most revolutionary rocket ever constructed. More revolutionary than Saturn V, than the Space Shuttle, than Falcon 9, than Falcon Heavy. Has Starship really earned this lofty title? All of this and more coming at you on the Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to a special bulletin here on the Angry Astronaut. It'd probably be better just to call this an unexpected bulletin because I was planning on releasing some information, some interviews rather, from my SpaceCom experience about space-based solar power, low Earth orbit cleanup, and a lot of the companies that are committed to doing that over here in Europe. A lot of fantastic interviews that are definitely coming to you soon. But in the immediate aftermath of what happened with Starship, I think there's a couple of other things that I would like to address, or one thing in particular. As some of you may know, I do reaction videos on this channel. I've been doing more of them lately than I used to, although my reaction videos are more frequently in regards to printed material rather than reaction videos to other videos. I find that a lot of times articles contain a lot more in-depth information, and also when you're talking about a printed article that's in the mainstream media, I think you really need to be held to a pretty high standard. Of course, most of the mainstream media doesn't actually live up to that high standard, but nevertheless, I still think that they should be held to a high standard. And where I'm going with all of this is an article released by Eric Berger. And I know it wasn't that long ago that I kind of dissed him on this channel, and I hate doing it again because overall, I really respect this man's work. I read his articles all the time. He's a great source of very accurate and responsible journalism for me, and has been invaluable to this channel, at least in terms of the accurate information that he provides. But when it comes to reporting on SpaceX, this guy is going more and more off the rails. And I'm referring in particular to one of his latest articles, just came out on the 15th. The gist of the article is that right now, after this last flight, after IFT-3, Starship is the most revolutionary rocket that has ever flown. Now think about what that statement means. I'll say it again. Starship is already, in its current form, the most revolutionary rocket that has ever flown. All right. Starship has not been reused. Neither the booster nor the orbiter has successfully landed. It hasn't deployed any payloads. It is yet to even complete an orbit of the Earth. Now, I absolutely believe that Starship has the potential of being the most revolutionary rocket in history. Indeed, I am still working on a book entitled How Starship Will Save the World. I may change the name of that to How SpaceX Will Save the World, and I absolutely believe it. I believe that the incredibly low price per kilogram that Starship has the potential of bringing to modern spaceflight could transform so many industries and catapult our civilization out into space. But I really don't like it when we get carried away with things, when we kind of get ahead of ourselves. I think maybe I need to just rename my channel the Reality Check channel, because I really try to take a long, hard look at the claims that some people make and try to determine just how accurate those claims might be. And this is one of the most extraordinary claims ever. And this is coming from a guy who does reports on UFOs. But nevertheless, I thought that it was definitely worthwhile to have a look at this article, to examine it and to take it apart piece by piece and determine whether or not it's actually true. Now that Starship has flown, has made it to space, has at least attempted to re-enter, does it already qualify as the most revolutionary rocket that has ever been flown? Does it really deserve such a lofty title? But before we go any further, I would like to thank the following awesome people. Jim, just Jim, and Gordon, followed by Curtis Wall, Tom Jensen, Mark Hector, Gabe Mendez, Darren Cook, Bart DeBoybank, and finally Ricker. And in addition to that, I'd like to thank Jim Sanger for editing their membership to a very high contribution. Thank you so much to all of these new Patreon supporters. You have officially gotten me just past the 40% mark of getting to 1% of my subscribers being Patreon supporters, which will change everything about this channel. It's already made a huge difference. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to join them, all the details are in the description. Okay, enough of that. Let's get into this article. Let me tell you something. It does make a number of very good points. Quote, no space agency or company has dazzled us more in the last 10 years than SpaceX. The company produces moments of wonder and originality that are both breathtaking and full of promise. What SpaceX does best is provide us a glimpse into a tantalizingly close future. And that happened again on Thursday with the third Starship launch. No argument there. It was an amazing moment and a significant moment. He goes on to say, the moment of true amazement came as Starship descended to an altitude of 100 kilometers and began entering a thicker atmosphere. For a couple of minutes, we were treated to unprecedented views of atmospheric heating arcing on the spacecraft. It's one thing to know about the perils of plasma and compression as the spacecraft falls back to Earth at 27,000 kilometers per hour into thickening air. It's another thing to see it. So of course, we want to talk about Starlink and how amazing it was in this particular flight, and I agree with this as well. Starlink terminals on the ship were sending signals to satellites in low Earth orbit, which then sent them back to Earth. This is not a new idea. For the last 40 years, NASA has used a small constellation of tracking and data relay satellites to communicate with spacecraft, beginning with the Space Shuttle. Starship was able to communicate with these satellites upon its re-entry, but it was only at a low data rate and it dropped out as the plasma thickened. The Starlink connection remained longer, and it was what enabled the stunning video of re-entry. To accomplish this, SpaceX had to build a reusable rocket, the Falcon 9, which is capable of reflying many times. This enabled the company to launch more than 5,500 Starlink satellites and create a global network. SpaceX operates by a factor of 10 more satellites than any other company or country in the world. Won't disagree with that either. It's an amazing accomplishment. It has nothing to do with Starship, but it's an amazing accomplishment. Because of this, it was able to produce unprecedented data and video of Starship's turbulent re-entry. The journey to reach this capability has produced many of those dazzling moments. There was that first land-based landing of the Falcon 9 rocket days before Christmas in 2015, followed a few months later by the first landing of a booster on a drone ship. There was Starman in orbit and the dual booster landing with the first Falcon Heavy launch, and so on. These SpaceX moments feel like a portal opening into the future. That is their power. The first booster landings hinted at the possibility of reusing first stages. The dual booster landing suggested that it could be done at scale. Today, we're seeing this promised future as some Falcon rockets fly 20 times, and SpaceX is likely to approach a truly unprecedented 150 launches this year. This high launch cadence enabled Starlink, through which SpaceX has delivered high-speed broadband around the world and in space. What Thursday's revelatory re-entry footage promises is a world in which launch is cheap and abundant. No longer will we need to worry so much about mass or volume, which have been tyrannical overlords to mission planners since the inception of spaceflight nearly 7 decades ago. I don't disagree with any of that, but here's one important thing. All of these key moments, all of these momentous occurrences in SpaceX history came in conjunction with some sort of amazing accomplishment, something that had never really been done before. Now, something was attempted on Thursday that had never been done before, but it was not successfully carried out. Mr. Berger acknowledges that, but it doesn't seem to matter to him. Quote, "This was the third test flight of Starship, and for the second time in a row, the Super Heavy booster completed a full duration burn and executed a successful hot staging separation from the Starship upper stage. This is significant because it means the most powerful first stage ever can now be considered operational." Yeah, I would say that's probably true, although not reusable yet, which means all we have right now is a great big stainless steel rocket. SpaceX hasn't quite mastered the art of landing the first stage. I think we're a little further away than that, Mr. Berger. I would say that we are a significant distance away from landing the first stage. Haven't even tried bringing it back to the pad, and thus far, we've had to blow it up every single time. On Thursday, Super Heavy performed a flip maneuver and a boost back burn to reorient itself for a soft landing at sea. However, not all the requisite Raptor engines relit for a landing burn, and the rocket exploded about half a kilometer above the Gulf of Mexico. This is fine progress for just the third test flight, and it seems reasonable to expect a soft landing at sea during the next mission or two. Yeah, okay, it's fine progress, I guess, if you're not trying to get to the moon by September of 2026, and pretty soon we're going to talk about why it's so important that we master, or that SpaceX anyway, I say we a lot, because we're all in this together, guys. Us spaceflight enthusiasts want to see mankind return to the moon, so we are definitely engaged and invested in all of this. Anyway, SpaceX has pretty much solved first stage landings, yeah, with Falcon 9, with 275 successes with the Falcon 9 rocket. It would not surprise me to see the company land a booster back at its Starbase facility in South Texas this year. Perhaps. However, we're talking about a capture maneuver, and that's a different game entirely. And given the fact that every time we have a flight that doesn't go exactly as planned, we have a mishap report, an investigation, corrective actions, etc., it's going to be a couple of months at least in between launches. So SpaceX isn't going to get a whole lot of opportunities this year to try to land the booster back at its Starbase facility before 2025 rolls around. Now, he goes on to point out correctly that Starship will clearly take longer. It is the more difficult technology. Notably, the vehicle completed a full duration burn on Thursday and could easily have put itself into stable orbit around the Earth. Just to put a fine point on this, Starship this week did what every rocket in history this side of Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and the Space Shuttle has done before it achieved a nominal orbital insertion and lost its first and second stages. Well, maybe. We actually don't know how thoroughly SpaceX was controlling the vehicle at the time. We're not sure about whether or not the Pez dispenser door opened properly, what the orientation of the rocket was like. What we do know is that they were unable to relight a Raptor engine because of the roll rate of the vehicle. So it may not have been under thorough enough control to effectively deploy a payload, assuming a payload had been on board at the time. It's a little early to declare victory on that front. And Mr. Berger admits that, quote, "We're probably a flight or two from SpaceX understanding and controlling Starship in space. Still, bigger questions surround the vehicle's ability to survive that fiery re-entry with a hopefully reusable tile system. A fully reusable Starship upper stage is certainly years away, but a flight or two away from SpaceX understanding and controlling Starship? Well, that is something that Vulcan Centaur certainly did properly. It was completely under control and deployed its payload earlier this year properly. Starship might not have been able to do that, and so it hasn't quite lived up to the achievements of every other expendable rocket that's come before that. But we've only just started to hear Mr. Berger's claims. Quote, "But even with those caveats, Starship is already the most revolutionary rocket ever built. Because of a relentless focus on costs and cheap building materials such as stainless steel, SpaceX can likely build and launch a fully expendable version of Starship for about $100 million. Most of that money is in the booster with its 33 engines. So once Super Heavy becomes reusable, you can probably cut manufacturing costs down to about $30 million per launch." Mr. Berger then follows that up with some of the most ridiculous apples to pears comparisons that I can possibly imagine. Of course, SLS is an easy target, and so it should be. $2.2 billion per launch for 95 tons to low Earth orbit approximately, although the later versions are going to be able to lift more like 120 to 140 tons, but still, SLS is the wrong rocket to launch anything to low Earth orbit, that's for sure. A factor of 100 times more expensive for less throw weight, for $2.2 billion per launch. And then there's the European Space Agency's Vega. Its costs are roughly on par with a Starship that has a reusable first stage. For $37 million with Vega, you get about 1.5 metric tons to low Earth orbit. Again, that's a factor of 100 times less payload than Starship. Perhaps you're beginning to understand the revolution that's underway with the Starship vehicle? Well, I would be more convinced by this revolution, Mr. Berger, if you weren't using some of the worst fuzzy math that I could ever seen in a spaceflight article. I really don't understand why you chose to come up with these kinds of numbers. $100 million in fully expendable mode for Starship is utterly absurd, and let me explain why. 33 engines on the first stage, 6 engines on the second stage, so you're looking at throwing away a booster and an orbiter with a total of 39 engines and everything else that goes with it, and that's only going to cost SpaceX about $100 million, which is the same as SpaceX charges for a Falcon Heavy launch. Well, a little different. Falcon Heavy is about $90 million, and that's reusable, which means somehow SpaceX has managed to bring down the cost of an entire Starship and all those engines down to the cost of the upper stage on a Falcon Heavy. Even if you save all 3 of the boosters on Falcon Heavy, only the upper stage somehow costs the same amount of money as a fully expended Starship. Sorry, but that's bullshit. And let me try to explain how he came up with these figures. His source is payloadspace.com, and the cost to launch, internal cost to launch, according to them, for an expendable Starship will cost approximately $100 million to build and expend in a forward-looking post-research and development model. In other words, not the rocket we just saw, but a forward-looking post-research and development model. Full reusability will significantly lower future launch costs, but in its fully expendable phase, we have to factor in lots of other costs. For example, the cost of all that research and development, which payloadspace.com estimates is going to hit approximately $10 billion for Starship by the end of 2026. And NASA isn't eating all of those costs. Actually, it's only eating about 40% of those costs. To make a fair comparison between Starship and any other rocket, especially brand new rockets, you have to amortize those development costs into the overall cost of launch. And in addition to that, you can't compare what the rocket is going to cost SpaceX to what the European Space Agency, for example, or even Boeing charges the customer to launch their rocket for, because Vega cost $37 million for the customer, not to the European Space Agency. So these are not fair comparisons at all. And in addition to that, if we want to do an apples to apples comparison between what a fully expendable Starship is going to cost to get a payload out to the moon compared to what SLS is going to cost, well, it's $100 million internally per Starship. And on top of that, you need to add in research and development costs, profit margin, etc. Let's call it $200 million. And that's probably pretty conservative. And then you need to launch 10 of those expendable Starships in order to fully refuel Starships efficiently to get it out to the moon, which means you're looking at 11 times 200 million. You're looking more at $2.2 billion for all of those expendable Starships in order to get a single mission out to the moon. Granted, somewhat less than SLS probably, but not a whole lot less, and certainly not a revolution. If you add in research and development costs on top of all of those launch costs, SpaceX is going to be way the hell in the red compared to the less than $5 billion that they're getting from NASA to fund HLS, not just for Artemis 3, but Artemis 4, which would require a total of 22 launches of expendable Starship. So what's the answer? You don't want an expendable Starship. Starship is only revolutionary if it's reusable. And Elon has said as much many times. Full, rapid reusability is the key to success with Starship. But Eric Berger doesn't stop there. In addition, he says it's not just the cost or the payload, it's the cadence. SpaceX has 4 more Starships essentially ready to go. Well, not exactly ready to go, because we've seen that they've had to make modifications and corrections with every mishap report, but anyway, we have already seen SpaceX's proficiency with the Falcon 9 rocket. Absolutely true. Does anyone doubt that we'll see double-digit Starship launches in 2025 and many dozens per year during the second half of this decade? Yeah, I definitely doubt that. And here's why. Starship needs to get to the point of being absolutely flawless with every flight. Otherwise, the FAA is not going to permit back-to-back Starship launches, certainly not double-digit Starship launches. As a matter of fact, the current PEA doesn't even permit double-digit Starship launches. So yeah, I do doubt that Starship is going to have double digits in 2025. Maybe it will. I think it's possible, but I think there's quite a number of hurdles in its way, not least of which are regulatory agencies that don't want to see SpaceX flying this gigantic intercontinental ballistic missile. And keep in mind, Starship has yet to even attempt a catch landing at the launch pad. We have only just begun to see exploding Starship boosters. And with every booster that blows up, there will be a mishap report, an investigation, corrective actions, and a delay. We're just not going to see that rapid of progress, not yet. We are definitely seeing some amazing progress. And once Starship achieves reusability of at least the booster, and especially reusability of the entire ship, then absolutely it will have revolutionized spaceflight. But it's a bad idea in my opinion, and a bit irresponsible to be announcing mission accomplished so soon. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and as always, stay angry about space.